Hello everyone, and welcome back to Picture Mavericks. Before we begin, a note. Children of Men contains graphic war violence, depictions of fascism and state brutality, refugee persecution, and themes of human extinction. This video covers all of those elements fully and directly. This one is for mature audiences. Today we are talking about Children of Men, released in 2006, directed by Alfonso Cuarón, produced by Universal Pictures, and starring Clive Owen, Julianne Moore, Michael Caine, Chiwetel Ejiofor, and Claire Hope-Ashide. The film was shot by the legendary cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki, whose work here is considered by many film professionals to be among the greatest cinematography ever committed to screen. The film was a modest commercial success on release, but has grown steadily in reputation in the years since. And today, it is widely considered one of the greatest films of the 21st century. Now here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. Children of Men is set in a world where human beings have been infertile for 18 years. No child has been born anywhere on Earth since 2009. The youngest human being alive is 18 years old. And humanity, faced with the certain knowledge that it has no future, is in the process of collapsing. But the film is not about infertility. It is about what happens to people, to societies, to the very idea of civilization when the future disappears. It is about what human beings do when hope is gone, what they become, what they're willing to do to each other, and what it takes in the middle of all that darkness for one person to decide to keep moving forward anyway. That is Children of Men, and it is one of the most urgent and most necessary films ever made. Before we get into the story, I want to establish why this film matters in the history of cinema, because its reputation is not accidental and the reasons for it are specific. Alfonso Cuarón made a series of decisions in making this film that were each individually bold and collectively extraordinary, and the combination of them produced something that no other film quite replicates. The first decision was to shoot the film almost entirely handheld, with a camera that moves through the world as a participant rather than an observer, that gets jostled and obstructed and splattered alongside the characters, creating an immediacy that is almost physically uncomfortable to watch. The second decision was to use extended long takes of extraordinary length and complexity, sequences that last minutes without a cut, that follow characters through chaos and violence and tenderness in continuous unbroken time, forcing you to experience events as they happen rather than as edited impressions of events. The third decision was to build the world of 2027 not as a science fiction spectacle, but as an extrapolation of 2006, using real news footage, real political rhetoric, real refugee imagery, and real contemporary anxieties, turned up slightly and projected forward, so that the dystopia never feels distant or fantastical, but always feels like something that is already beginning. These three decisions together produce a film that does not feel like cinema in the conventional sense. It feels like being there. The world of Children of Men is the most carefully constructed dystopia in modern cinema, and I want to explain exactly how Cuarón builds it, because the method is as important as the result. He does not explain the world through exposition. He does not have characters sit down and describe how things got this way. He builds the world through detail, through the background of every frame, through the newspapers and the television broadcasts and the graffiti on the walls and the cages in the streets, and he trusts the audience to absorb it without being told what to think about it. Britain in 2027 is the last functioning state. Every other government has collapsed. And Britain's response to being the last country standing is to close its borders completely, to round up immigrants and refugees into detention camps, to militarize its streets, and to maintain a fiction of order through force and fear. The film was made in 2006, and the world it depicts, the anti-immigration rhetoric, the detention camps, the dehumanization of refugees, the creeping authoritarianism dressed in the language of security and order, was not a prediction so much as an extrapolation of things that were already happening. Watching it now, nearly 20 years later, the world of Children of Men does not look like science fiction. It looks like a warning that arrived slightly ahead of schedule. Theo Farron, played by Clive Owen, is one of the most carefully chosen protagonists in modern cinema. And understanding why he is the right person to carry this story is essential to understanding what the film is doing. Theo is not a hero. He is not brave or particularly capable or motivated by any grand purpose. He is a former activist who gave up on activism after his son died in a flu pandemic, who now works a bureaucratic government job, drinks too much, and moves through the dying world around him with the specific numbness of someone who has already done his grieving and emerged on the other side without any particular reason to keep feeling things. He does not believe in anything. That is the essential fact about Theo at the start of this film. Not that he is bad or weak, but that the part of him that connects to purpose and meaning in the future has been switched off, and he has organized his life around that absence. And this is precisely why he is the right person for what the film is about to ask of him. Because the film is not a story about a hero discovering courage. It is a story about a man who has already lost everything that makes the future worth believing in, being given one impossible reason to believe again, and having to decide whether that reason is enough to act on. The answer Theo arrives at, slowly and at enormous cost, is the heart of everything. Key, played by Claire Hope-Ashidi, is an undocumented refugee who is miraculously, inexplicably, impossibly pregnant, the first pregnant woman on Earth in 18 years, and the film handles the revelation of her pregnancy with a simplicity and a weight that is almost overwhelming. She shows Theo in a stable, surrounded by animals, and the film does not underline the obvious biblical parallel. It simply places it there and lets you feel it, because the image of the first new human life in 18 years appearing in a stable among animals in a broken world does not need commentary. He is not a symbol in the way that reduces her to an abstraction. She is a specific person, young and frightened and resourceful and funny and completely aware that she is carrying something that the entire world would want to control if it knew she existed. And Claire Hope-Ashidi plays her with a groundedness that keeps her human even as the plot around her becomes almost mythological. What Key represents is not simply hope in the greeting card sense of the word. She represents the continuation of the human story, the possibility that the species gets another chapter, and the film is deeply interested in the question of who gets to decide what that chapter looks like, whose hands the future ends up in, and what people are willing to do to control it. The Fishes, the activist group led by Julian, played by Julian Moore, and Luke, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, are presented by the film with considerable complexity, and I want to give that complexity the attention it deserves. On the surface, the Fishes are the resistance, the people fighting against the British government's brutal treatment of refugees, the people who want to use Key's pregnancy to expose the regime and change the world. But the film is not comfortable with the Fishes, and it does not ask you to be comfortable with them either. Because the Fishes treat Key as a political asset rather than a person. They are willing to use her, to expose her, to put her and her child at risk for the political impact of the revelation. And when their own internal conflicts lead to violence and betrayal, it becomes clear that the movement has been corrupted by exactly the kind of power hunger and ideological rigidity that corrupts every movement that loses sight of the human beings it claims to be fighting for. This is one of the most honest and most uncomfortable things Children of Men does, which is to refuse to offer a clean, heroic alternative to the government's brutality, to show that the people who are right about what is wrong with the world are not automatically right about what to do about it. And that ideology without humanity produces the same cruelty regardless of which direction it points. I need to spend a dedicated section on the long take sequences because they are the most discussed technical element of the film, and they deserve a proper explanation of what they are actually doing rather than just being described as impressive. A long take is a continuous shot with no cuts, and Children of Men contains several of extraordinary length and complexity, most famously the car ambush sequence and the Bexhill Corridor of War sequence, both of which last several minutes in continuous real time. The standard cinematic language of action sequences uses editing to control what you see and when, to emphasize certain moments, to direct your attention, to give you the most dramatic angle at the most dramatic moment, and to protect you slightly from the full chaos of what is happening by organizing it into comprehensible fragments. Cuarón refuses all of that. By staying in continuous time with no cuts, He removes the protective distance that editing creates and forces you to experience events as they unfold rather than as they have been organized for your benefit. You cannot look away from things that are happening at the edges of the frame. You cannot be directed toward what to notice. You are in the scene the same way the characters are in the scene, without the luxury of a cut to something else. The result is sequences that are among the most viscerally intense in cinema history, not because they are more violent than other films, but because the continuous time makes the violence feel real in a way that edited action never quite does. The car ambush sequence is the moment Children of Men announces exactly what kind of film it is, and I want to walk through it carefully because every decision in it is precise. Theo, Julian, Luke, and others are driving through a rural road when an ambush begins. A burning car in the road, masked figures emerging from the trees, chaos erupting instantly and without warning. The sequence is shot in continuous time inside and outside the car, the camera moving through windows and around bodies and through the action without a single cut. And because there is no editing to organize what is happening, the ambush feels genuinely shocking and genuinely dangerous in a way that is almost physically difficult to sit through. But beyond the technical achievement, the sequence is doing something specific to the story, because it is the sequence in which Julian is killed, and the way it happens, suddenly, without ceremony, without a dramatic death scene, just there and then not there, is the film's first major statement about the world it is depicting. In this world, important people die without the narrative courtesy of a meaningful moment. Things end abruptly. The world does not organize itself around your grief. And Theo, who has already lost so much, loses someone else in the space of 30 seconds of continuous chaotic real time, and has to keep moving because there is nothing else to do. Bexhill is the detention camp where undocumented refugees are held, and the sequence where Theo and Key enter it is the film's political argument made completely and unflinchingly visible. Bexhill is not a science fiction concentration camp. It is a direct visual reference to real images: Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, the refugee camps of various contemporary conflicts, and Cuarón is not being subtle about what he is doing. He is placing the film's dystopian imagery in explicit dialogue with real-world atrocities that were happening at the time the film was made, and that continue in various forms today. The people in Bexhill have been stripped of everything: their documents, their freedom, their status as human beings deserving of consideration, and they are held in conditions of deliberate degradation while the world outside tells itself that this is a necessary response to an extraordinary crisis. The film is asking you to recognize this logic, the logic that says extraordinary circumstances justify extraordinary cruelty, that the suspension of human rights is a regrettable necessity rather than a choice, that the people being dehumanized somehow brought it on themselves. Because this logic is not fictional, it is the logic that has been used to justify exactly these kinds of camps in the real world. And Children of Men is insisting that you see it clearly. The Corridor of War sequence is the greatest single sequence in the film and one of the greatest sequences in the history of cinema, and I want to explain exactly why with the precision it deserves. Theo is moving through Bexhill trying to reach Key when a full military assault on the refugee uprising begins around him, and what follows is approximately 7 minutes of continuous real-time combat shot in a single extended take, with Clive Owen moving through active fighting, past bodies and burning buildings and soldiers and rebels, the camera following him through smoke and chaos in unbroken time. The sequence took weeks to plan and days to film and contains technical achievements that cinematographers still discuss. But the technical achievement is not the point. The point is what happens in the middle of it. Theo finds Key and her newborn baby, and as he carries them through the building towards safety, the fighting stops. Not because anyone ordered it to stop, not because a ceasefire was called, but because soldiers on both sides hear the baby crying, and the sound of a newborn in a world that has not heard that sound in 18 years stops everyone. Combatants on both sides lowering their weapons, some of them reaching out to touch the child as Theo carries her past, some of them weeping, all of them stripped for a moment of everything except the recognition of what they are hearing. And then Theo and Key emerge from the building, and the fighting resumes behind them. That sequence is everything the film believes about hope and humanity contained in 7 minutes of continuous real time. It is the single greatest argument for why this film matters. Theo begins the film as a man who has organized his entire existence around not believing in anything, because believing in things leads to loss, and loss is something he has already survived as much of as he can manage. And the film does not transform him through inspiration or revelation or a single moment of heroic decision. It transforms him through accumulation, through one small choice after another to keep going, to keep protecting Key, to keep moving toward the boat and the human project and the possibility that this child might reach people who can actually help her, even as everything around him falls apart, and even as the cost of each step becomes higher and higher. By the end of the film, Theo has been shot, has lost almost everyone he started with, and is bleeding in a small boat in the middle of a gray ocean, and he stays alive just long enough to make sure Key and her daughter are safe, and then he does not. And the film does not treat this as a tragedy in the conventional sense. It treats it as a completion. Theo found something worth dying for, not because it was heroic, but because it was real, because Key and her daughter are real and the future they represent is real, and a man who had stopped believing in the reality of anything found, at the very end, one thing he could not stop believing in. That is his arc, not heroism, restoration. The ending of Children of Men is one of the most precisely calibrated endings in modern cinema, and I want to be very direct about what it is and is not doing. He is in a small boat with her daughter. Theo has just died, and out of the fog emerges a large ship called Tomorrow, the vessel of the Human Project, the organization that has been searching for a pregnant woman and that represents the only organized effort to address humanity's crisis. The ship arrives. The fog is still there. We do not see what happens next, and that incompleteness is the entire point. The film does not show you the Human Project's island or their laboratory or their plan or whether any of it will actually work. It does not offer you the resolution of knowing that humanity is saved. It offers you only this: the boat arriving, the possibility existing, the door opening. Because hope in this film is not the certainty of a good outcome. Hope is the possibility of one, and the decision to act as if that possibility matters even when you cannot see where it leads. He named her daughter Dylan, after Theo's suggestion, after the poet Dylan Thomas, who wrote, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage against the dying of the light," and the name is the film's final statement, that what matters is not surviving, but insisting, not accepting the dying of the light, but moving toward whatever light remains. Tomorrow is the name of the ship. Tomorrow is what the film ends on. That is enough. So let us bring it all together. Children of Men is a film about hope, but it is one of the most rigorously honest depictions of hope ever put on screen, because it refuses to make hope comfortable or easy or guaranteed. The hope in this film is not optimism. Optimism is the belief that things will probably work out. Hope, as Children of Men understands it, is something harder and more specific than that. It is the decision to act as if the future matters even when you have no evidence that it does, to carry something precious through a world that is actively trying to destroy it, to keep moving toward a boat in the fog, not because you can see what is on the other side, but because the alternative is to stop, and the alternative is unacceptable. The film is also saying something very direct about the political world it was depicting in 2006, and that we are still navigating now. It is saying that the dehumanization of refugees and immigrants and the people designated as outside the protection of civilization is not a neutral policy choice. It is a moral catastrophe, and that a society that builds its survival on the exclusion and degradation of the most vulnerable people has already lost something it cannot recover by force. The baby that stops the war for 30 seconds in the corridor of Bexhill stops it because every soldier on both sides recognizes in that sound something more fundamental than any ideology, the simple, irreducible fact of a new human life. And the film is asking whether we can maintain that recognition outside of that corridor, outside of that extraordinary moment, in the ordinary daily political choices that add up to the world we build. My personal view on this film is that it is the most important film of the 21st century so far. Not the most enjoyable, not the most beautiful, though it is both of those things, but the most necessary. It is a film that looks at where we are heading with clear eyes and complete honesty and asks whether we have the will to choose differently. And it asks that question not through speeches or lectures, but through the experience of one man carrying one child through one burning world toward one boat in the fog. Most people who have seen Children of Men remember it, as the most intense cinematic experience of their lives. Now you know exactly what it was doing to produce that intensity and what it was saying with every frame of it. Thank you for watching Picture Mavericks. And if this breakdown gave you something new to think about, consider subscribing because we go deeper so you do not have to. See you in the next one.